Shirley, I'm fine. Doing well. How are you?
Okay. So, Erin, talk to me about why you decided that we should talk about this topic because I know you actually brought in some very sensitive areas that you want us to touch today. So, someone that is listening to us right now, what do you expect the person to take back home at the end of this discussion today?
Yeah. So one point we have already touched upon at least in some of the shows a little bit on, but I think it's uh, good to expand on this because, I mean, normally we are so invested in running our business, and quite often the way how they evolve is you evolve or you start as a one-man show or something, and basically the business is maybe in your name. But at the end of the day, if you focus on your end goal is to create a legacy. It's to create something bigger. Maybe even to create something for your children or so. And I think from that perspective, even if you are a young entrepreneur, it's good to have the end goal in mind and plan for that and take that into account. And quite often, the issue is that we are not sure how long we're going to last on this earth. I mean, some people pass away at very young ages. And so, to the extent that you have already put in place here is that even if one starts out as a sole proprietor or as a partnership, if you do that, you have the full 100% legal liability for your business. And so you want to separate your legal liability from your business liability. And one of the ways or how you would do that is create a company. Sorry.
Erin, carry on, please.
Yeah, so it would be basically to create a company or something similar that a similar vehicle that limits your liability, and in that sense, you would also be able to limit your personal liability to that vehicle. Now, obviously, your banker might ask you, if you ask finance from a bank, they will ask you for a guarantee, but you will give them a guarantee to the amount of the loan that the business has taken. It is not that your whole personal estate, your life, your wife, your house, and everything is at stake for that. And I think that's the first step. Then the next thought around this is that if you business transfer, either if you're old and you want to retire and you want your children to carry on, or a business partner. So now it comes to transfer of shares, or if one actually is dealing with a estate and now it's the estate that needs to be transferred. If everything is in your own name, then it can be very difficult for a business actually to survive that, because once you die, then your business almost dies with you. Maybe there's a trademark or some goods or some knowledge associated with that, but then once the people that do the estate administration get involved, I mean, that can take quite a lot of time. And during that time, if things stand, obviously you're going to lose all the customers and so on. So for that reason, something that has unlimited life, like a permanent capital vehicle, like a company or something like that, will help you with that. And yeah, that will just make this whole thing easier. It will protect your personal assets, and where you basically differentiate between your business and your personal assets. It will also help you to end up in some, or facilitate basically a process in a state, and then it will also help to provide for your family as a continued source of income if you have this succession plan in place.
I mean, I'm actually enjoying what you're saying, because I think what you're saying is really very vital, right? So now the question that comes to mind is, right, now looking at most entrepreneurs, especially at the very starting point, right? It's always like, we kind of feel like there are many entrepreneurs who they're not yet able, right, to separate their personal expenses from the business expenses, their personal income, for those maybe that are working and having a business at once, their personal income from the business income, right? So what are some of the ways that can actually permit an entrepreneur to start distinguishing between the business expenses and the personal expenses, likewise income, right? So that it can actually facilitate maybe this future planning.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the bottom of that is financial discipline, bookkeeping or accounting, and having separate accounts for your business, and being disciplined that if it's a business expense, even if you paid for it, but to make sure to classify it as a business expense, maybe you recover that in a sense that even if you paid just out of your wallet, and you make sure that you have separate accounts for you as yourself as a person and for your business. And I mean, in as much as it's, kind of unnecessary, I won't say unnecessary, it's not unnecessary, but cumbersome admin, but it's really the starting point of getting, even before you have the legal separation. I guess you can think about legal separation once your business has grown to a certain extent, and it makes sense to create a separate legal entity for the business. But it already starts with that you have basically a separate accounts.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erin. Erin, then there is another scenario, right, where you have entrepreneurs who are maybe doing a business. At that point, right, maybe they just started this business. They are not able to pay themselves, right, because maybe every money that they have is important for the business. But now, what's the right way to be able to handle the situation? So, for instance, you've started a business, you've invested, I don't know, let's just say 20 million, 10 million francs into this business. But now you know for sure that you cannot take maybe a salary out of this business. But ideally, you should be paid. So how do you think, what do you think is the best approach for entrepreneurs to deal with such circumstances?
Okay, I mean, so actually that would be a good case to also have your business in a separate legal entity, because if this business venture doesn't go well, I mean, now you can't raise a salary from the business. So that means you need to have your salary from another source, or you need to have another source of income. But at the same time, if the business is not available, then you need to, or it's not producing cash, then you would need to.
Hi, Erin. Do you want to repeat that again? We actually lost you for a bit.
Yeah.
We lost you for a bit. Do you want to repeat that again?
Yeah. So I was saying that I think that would be a good case for or good motivation why you should have your business in a separate legal entity, because I mean you can draw a salary, but you at least conceptually. Now the business can't pay for it, but it can build up as a loan account in the business. So while you are not physically remunerated, your business owes you that money. And so on an accounting statement, you will have a claim on the business. Even if at the time, if the business doesn't perform well and now it needs to wind up, you will have a claim on that business estate. And that's one thing. The other thing is also if the business, for example, fails, then it's the business that fails. It doesn't drag you with your own personal estate in. or only as much as you guaranteed the business. But if, for example, you are just running the business on your own, in your own name, then, and the business fails and you have a home, you might actually need to sacrifice the home as well. And that's kind of why it's important to have this legal separation. And then, of course, yes, even if the business can't pay you, maybe it means you need to have a separate source of income that actually gives you a salary while you are working on your business. But at the same time, you also can have, if you have that legal separation, you can build up a loan account of the money that the business owes you. And then if the business is at one or other stage, point in time, capable of making enough profits, then it can repay you.
Wow. I mean, I like that approach, right? Because I think actually that's one of the best approach that is necessary. Now, I mean, let's talk about, let's take the scenario of someone who is doing exactly what you've said, right? This person is keeping a separate account for his or her personal expenses. This person is keeping a separate account for his or her personal income, separate from the business income and expenses, right? I think my next question will be, how often should they be able to sit down and review everything that they've tracked separately? What will your advice be to these people?
Monthly, I mean, normally for businesses, you have your monthly management accounts or something like that. And so in as much as the business owes you, gives you a monthly salary, I would assume, then also, I mean, those expenses. And so it just makes sense to have it on a regular basis, because if you all want to accumulate it, and I think we mentioned that in the previous show where we spoke about tax, you wait until the end of the tax year, maybe the week or even the day before the tax due date, and now you sit on a with a pile of piece of papers and invoices and things like that next to you, and you try to sort out things. That's not a good idea.
Okay. So hello, fellow viewers. If you're watching us, remember this is Smart Money Talks, and we are talking about personal financial planning for entrepreneurs, right? So remember that the reason why we go live is because we give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. Tell us what you think about this topic, contribute, you can add, you can challenge what we are saying. Okay, it's all left to you. And remember, we are here because you're there. So please, your contribution matters. Thank you. So, Erin, I want us to look at savings and investments now, right? So I think there is this kind of like dilemma sometimes that actually comes up when it comes to entrepreneurs. It's always like, I'm just starting a business, right? Almost every franc that comes out of the business, I have to invest it in that business. So the dilemma now is, do I save when I'm starting a business, or I just invest everything in that business and continuously? So what is your take on that? When entrepreneurs are just starting a business, right, should they actually invest while still starting, or there is a certain period of time when they should start? What's your take?
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think one needs to qualify invest and what it means, and then also where exactly is your business. So if your business is a complete startup and it's not generating any cash or any profits, then obviously you have to basically, I mean, you will not be able to get anything out. So in that sense, the money that you have will probably go into your business. And if you have another business or another maybe salary job or whatever, I guess those monies will also find their way into the business. But now, if you think a little bit forward, if your business starts growing and if it can at least pay a salary, now your salary, I mean, obviously you are determining how much the salary is, whether it's something that is just helping you to come by with groceries, or whether it's a little bit more. But now you need to consider that, and then again, that will depend on the capability of the business. But you would consider that, for example, if you are a salaried individual, you have the benefit of a medical aid, you have the benefit of a retirement contribution, something like that, which as an entrepreneur you don't have. And to the extent possible, your business should cater for that. So in your salary, make provision for that. And now there's obviously this thing of I mean, if you're a private person, to then get some kind of a medical aid membership. I mean, I guess there are different levels to it, so one can take the basic one. Similarly, for retirement, one can put away a little bit of money, especially if one is young. I mean, it makes sense. However, I mean, it requires also some thought. And one of the things that I mean, especially as a young person, if you're fit and healthy and so on, maybe you think, and I thought that for the longest time ever, I still think that medical aid is a waste of time, because if you don't get sick, then you are not using it. But at the same time, things could happen, and then you would want to be a little bit protected. Now, so in some way, there should be some provision, at least from a planning perspective, like that. And now there is maybe another way how one can think about it, and that is what we did in the family. My parents did it, and I was always a proponent of that, but it requires discipline, and that is that you run your medical aid on the lowest level possible, that the least cost level, and you try to create a kind of a private fund that accumulates monies over time. And then later on, you can divorce from your medical aid and you can have your kind of self-insurance. Now, obviously, there could be some really major thing that happens, in which case it will make a major dent in your self-insurance, or maybe if your self-insurance is still quite young in nature and doesn't have accumulated a lot, then so there is a risk associated with that. But I think it's a way to think about. I'm not prescriptive, and I think people need to do their own research and think about it. But I mean, it's only the principle that if you give your money to somebody else, and then that goes with all sorts of other insurance as well. Those people, they will give you some of the money that you pay to them back in a certain case. But obviously that will not be all the money, that will just be a bit. So over a lifetime, you will spend quite a lot of money in feeding these insurance companies and having them build nice high-rise buildings and so on. Whereas if you could keep that money over yourself, and if you think of a 20, 30-year horizon, I think you could actually come up with substantial amounts of money that you pay over to these guys, that if you put that into a pool, and if you were disciplined enough to keep that pool separate, that you would sit actually with a substantial cover at the end of the day, or a financial asset that could help you along.
Now, so we're talking about personal financial management.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Yeah. So I'm saying that, I mean, obviously, one can think about self-insurance, and this idea is that whatever. I mean, so maybe there is a bridging period where you would pay your medical aid and your retirement thing and so on as prescribed, but at the same time, you try to create a separate pool to the extent that your business can afford it. And then at one or other stage, you can migrate fully. It requires discipline because you don't touch that money and you make sure that nobody else touches it unless for a design purpose. So if you have kind of a medical self-insurance, then you would need to you would only need to touch it in case of a medical emergency. But if you think over a 20, 30-year horizon, the amount of money that you would give into insurances or medical aids or things like that, and maybe even if you have financial advisors involved and they take their fees, I mean, that's quite substantial. And so you could actually, over a longer time period, sit with a substantial safety cushion if you kept that money yourself, or actually a significant financial asset that could be available to someone, if one passes away or something like that, to the children or to the wife or so. And it's again, it's just an idea, but I mean, we have done it in our family. I think it has worked for us somehow, and it's something to think about. And I think everybody can have an individual opinion on that. People also should get financial advice on that, but it's something to consider. In principle, to get advice is not bad. The question is, you also need to do, just relying on the advisor is maybe not the best idea. You need to do your own homework, because the financial advisors, I mean, one has to recognize that they earn fees and that's their business. So they will want to earn fees out of you, and they may talk you into things and may create necessities that maybe are not necessarily the most efficient vehicles, or maybe they are not, yeah, how can I say it? Maybe not appropriate for your situation, but in any case, they will try to create a need out of it because they want to earn a fee. And so one needs to keep that in mind. And that comes, for example, into play when people come around. I remember I was a young guy. I was just starting my career, first job after college. And so this guy came around. He used to be a maths teacher. He became an insurance salesman, and he was trying to convince me that I need a life insurance. And so then I was like, okay, I'm young. I don't care. I don't have anybody. So if I pass over, there's nothing that will happen. And then he was like, yeah, but maybe somebody needs money for your grave. And I was like, no, I mean, that can't be my family will cater for that. And then he was coming, oh yeah, but there's a savings component attached to this whole thing. And if you don't pass away, and then by the age of 55 or so, this thing will return to you, and basically with the savings plan, you will get a lot of money. So finally, he convinced me. Now, I mean, when this thing matured, the amount of money that was saved in inverted commas. I mean, that was not even close to what I paid in. So I think with that, yeah, one needs to some word of caution about this, really. And so once you have these guys on board, I mean, they will always come with some new exciting product where you can invest and, you know, for your retirement or something like that, and keep the fees in mind. I think that's the most important thing, because quite often they make return projections. I mean, obviously they will not go and exaggerate, but at the end of the day, the returns, the real returns, may be quite low if you take inflation into account. So now, once they project out, it sounds quite exciting, but 20 years later, 30 years later, once you have once you are there, and you have a new inflationary environment, it may not actually be such a big sum of money. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then also to ask what all the fees are, like the all-in fee, because they get a fee, and then there are certain other brokerage fees and certain taxes. And so you want to know about the whole gambit before you make that decision.
Okay. Thanks, Ewing. Ewing, you mentioned a very sensitive part, right? Which was kind of like when you're talking about the fact that your teacher was trying to convince you to get a life insurance, right? Which is more or less linked to death, right? So that takes me to another aspect of the discussion we had to discuss today, which is the power of the will, right? So why do you think having a will is necessary? Right, because I remember actually the reason why I think I would like to know is because I actually remember that when my dad died, there was no will, right? So yeah, I can actually imagine, like, yeah, the consequences of that, because every time when I sit and I think back to that day, I always feel like, what would my dad really have wanted us to do, right? Even sometimes if I have to make any decision in relation to anything that is that ideally, if he was alive, right, he would have been the one taking that decision. I always have to go back and try to figure out, okay, what would my dad have wanted me to do at this instance? What will he had wished that would have happened to this decision or that, right? So it actually leaves you in a state where sometimes you're kind of like, okay, you're guessing, right? So in your case, right, given the fact that
is to think about succession planning. And the reason why is that because even if one doesn't die, but maybe one, even if one thinks about retirement, maybe early retirement, maybe things like that, one is incapacitated to work or so, who takes the business over, who jumps in, and so on. So that needs to be planned and designed, and it needs to be designed with powers of attorney so that those people can actually have the legal powers to operate the business, to operate the bank accounts, things like that. And that ties then up with the will, where, I mean, in the will, obviously the beneficiaries of the estate can be different from the ones that take over in the succession plan. Sometimes they are the same people, sometimes not. If you run a technology business and your wife is the beneficiary of your estate, but she doesn't have a clue about the technology side of things, then you need to have maybe your business partner also who runs the business, but at the same time it needs to be determined that she will participate in the profits of the business as a shareholder. And so this whole thing we need to think about as entrepreneurs as creating a legacy. And that legacy is that there is a succession, that kind of there is a thought around who are the beneficiaries of the estate going to be, and then to ensure that it's going in a smooth way. So, for example, if you die without a will, you would be intestate. Yeah, so I just wanted to, if you don't have a will, then one would die as intestate. And so in that case, the state can decide how the assets are distributed. And typically they can appoint a court or something to do that, but it would also take a long time normally. I mean, and so if you have a business, then the business needs to continue. You can't just close the business for a while and say, okay, until that is over. And so that comes back to what I mentioned at the outset, to have a company or something, or a permanent capital vehicle that has limited legal liability and that can operate even if you pass away, and if you then have a will that describes how the shares are transferred or to whom they are transferred and who will become the owner of your portion in that business. It becomes easier.
Right. So if I now decide that, okay, yeah, I think having a will is something that is very good or things like that. So now how do you actually structure a will in such a way that it protects your children and also protects maybe those that you're taking care of them?
So, I mean, I think first thing to remember is that if one dies, so then all the estate creditors need to lodge their claim. Basically, anybody that thinks there are outstanding money. So that includes the receiver of revenue, that includes maybe the municipality for water bills and things like that, maybe a bank where one had a loan. So they all need to be paid off those claims. What remains goes to the beneficiaries. But then there is thought, and I mean, that is up to every individual how to apportion the assets or the ownership of assets between different individuals, between, I mean, the wife and the children and so on. And that depends really on the situation, on the age of the family. If the children are kind of independent or so, then it's probably your considerations will be different than if you have school-going children. Obviously, if you have school-going children, you will want to ensure that they can finish their school. If your wife is working or the spouse is working, it will be different consideration than if you have to think about catering for their living expenses because they haven't been working. And so I think there are a lot of individual considerations, but the idea of the will is to pave that way, to find a solution that if you as a business owner are not there anymore, that the people that are close to you will, will have a manner to live on.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's someone listening to us, and the person is like, but I've got no money in the bank, I've got no franc in the bank, so why do I need a will?
And for somebody starting out at a young age, I mean, is probably a fair question. But if you think about now, if you have a business and you think about building a legacy, building something that lasts, then you should not think only about now or next week, but think about the time ahead. 10 years from now, think about the bigger picture. That is really it. And now, I mean, there is one addition to that, obviously. So as your business moves on and changes, I mean, your business now is not the business in 10 years, or is not the business in 20 years. I mean, things are changing quite rapidly in our world, so you will need to adjust. And so with that adjustment, also personal adjustments come. I mean, your age is moving on, your children are growing up, things like that, your family situation with. So there will need to be some, I mean, you want to create some continuity in your will. So you don't want to change it every couple of years. But at the same time, there may also be situations where you need to review what you have thought about succession planning and what you have thought about the will and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's something to remember as well. So it's not something that is cast in stone. Once you have done it, and you can forget about it. I mean, it makes sense to review it from time to time.
So do you put that clause in the will that is supposed to be reviewed based on maybe those that are coming? Because truth be told, you have things, maybe you died some 20 years ago, 30 years ago, things change, right? The circumstances change, and maybe you want to review. So do you put that clause in the will?
Done your will 20 years ago, or So, I mean, maybe it's useful to look at what you wrote 20 years ago and whether you still think it fits your situation or whether now you want something different. And in that case, you would cancel that old will and you would draft something new that fits your current situation better.
Yeah. Okay. And now, thank you for that clarification. I mean, in a situation where, for instance, you want to pass a business maybe to maybe one of your children because you feel like maybe they have an expertise in maybe a certain field and you think they can better manage that business at that point in time. What do you think about maybe thinking through it in a situation where in future they are no longer there? Do you think that is okay for you to think past that other person? Like, for instance, you assign the duties to the person, maybe to your child, but at the same time, you still go ahead to be like, okay, if you die, then I need this. What do you think about that? Me just thinking.
Important question, because there are some people that try to, and I mean, it's said a bit tongue-in-cheek because it's quite a serious theme, but they try to rule the world from their grave. And in as much that is something that one should probably try to avoid, be simple, but don't put too much directions if this. I mean, obviously, maybe, yeah, I mean, I think if your children are, depending on where they are, I mean, if they are relatively grown up and you can see that they take over, then it's up to them to decide how they're going to run it and what they're going to do. If you have very young children, you may have some directive like that to say, okay, if the child can't, either because it's still a minor or because something has happened to them, there needs to be some person that stands in for that until the child is either grown up or until there is there is another solution in place. I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Okay.
And it's related a little bit to this issue around succession planning. So, I mean, if you want your children to take over at one stage, then at what point in time do they take over? At what point in time do you? And then that doesn't necessarily need to be death, the marker of that. That could be that you say, okay, I have done well. I want to go on early retirement. Now I want to enjoy life. I've worked 24/7, and you're 45, and you say, okay, I mean, these young guys, let them do the work. Or maybe it's a later stage in life and you are now 65 and you want your children, but I think there needs to be some determination around that, where you want to say, okay, what is happening with the business if I want to distance myself for my personal reasons? Who is going to take over? Who is going to run it? And at the end of the day, who is going to benefit from it?
I mean, let's look at the scenario where, right, maybe for some reason, okay, let me even put it this way, right? I've seen people or great businesses that exist, right? And when the founder disappears, I think those people should have had a will, because given the fact that they were so established and maybe doing well, I think they should have had one advisor, also one financial advisor or something like that, who must have advised them to keep a will, right? But at the end of the day, they hand these businesses down to maybe the kids. But few months down the line, you discover that maybe these businesses are no longer existing, or maybe they are poorly managed, right? So are there some systems and controls that you can put in place while still living to ensure that your legacy lives beyond you?
And you touched a very interesting point there. I mean, I had in my previous job, we had a rating model for businesses, for small businesses. And so one of the questions there was, which generation business is it? Is it somebody, entrepreneur, first generation, second generation, third generation? And so there was some kind of hypothesis, I think, and it was backed by statistical data apparently that second generation businesses are the ones typically that tend to have a higher failure rate, because the owner entrepreneur, he worked very hard, and then the children, maybe they, depending on how they grow up, maybe they can they are spoiled and maybe don't know how to run the business and so on. Now, how to regulate that in practice, that it doesn't happen, that's quite challenging. I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I think it's very much a matter of education, how you raise your children, how you bring them up, how you integrate them in the business, that they know from early on that they know what to do, that they grow in the business, that they also know how to be conservative. It's in practice, it may be quite difficult to regulate this and to say, I try to prevent the business from failing, but it's maybe an educational thing as to how you raise your children, how you integrate them in the business from an early stage on, how to teach them to be conservative in their financial affairs and things like that. And I think it has a lot to do with that.
Okay. Eri, thank you so much. I think this was very rich conversation. Personally, I get to learn every time we talk on topics like this. I'm very grateful for your insights. I'm very grateful that you get to share your experiences with us. To me, it's really a wonderful discussion, and thank you so much for sparing this time to talk to us. But Erwin, before we go, okay, we have a program that we are organizing, the Shirlma Show Bootcamp, that we are actually looking at educating entrepreneurs, right? People who aspiring entrepreneurs, right? To be able to either come up with ideas, we build the ideas, and at least get them to start. All those who already have ideas and they want to flesh it out, right? So we're actually coming up with one bootcamp. This is going to take 1 month, and a majority of this time within this 1 month is really going to be on the field training. Okay, so Erin, this is something that we actually came up with, given the fact that we heard the fact. So some people actually come up to us and kind of tell us that, okay, we have this idea, but somehow we are so scared to be able to. We are so scared to start a business. Or sometimes you have people that are working, they are very busy working. They have spouses or they have sisters and brothers that would have loved to go into partnership with them, but somehow they don't know how to actually kind of integrate these people into this business or help them to start. So we are providing that milieu where they can come to us and be like, okay, this is the idea that I wanted to kind of like build on, to establish and to expatiate, so that within this 1 month period, which begins on the 7th and ends on the 7th of this month and ends on this, it begins on the 7th of this month and ends on the 2nd of next month. So within this period, we want to be able to help entrepreneurs, to aspiring entrepreneurs, to be able to at least launch a business. And we're actually promising them a 2 months mentorship program. So Erwin, I said, let me just use our program to actually share this. For those that are interested, you actually see the numbers down. So we'll leave the numbers on the contact, the details that you want to contact. We'll leave them in the comment section, so you can check the comment section to see the numbers if you want to be a part of it, or if you want to recommend someone to be a part of it. We think it's a very interesting program. Erwin, thank you so much for this rich discussion. I think it was very essential. Greet everyone in Abidjan for us today. so all the Abidjanese, right? So I hope all the roads have been fixed.
We are getting there. It's looking good.
Okay, okay. That's good to know. I mean, thank you so much. Hello, fellow viewers. We are so grateful to have you today on this edition of Smart Money Talks. Remember, our topic for today was financial planning for entrepreneurs, right? Personal financial planning for entrepreneurs. Thank you so much. We actually discussed the importance of you separating your income and expenses, separating business income and expenses from personal income. We touched on investing in the future and also the power of the will. Remember that even though we're gone, you can still leave your questions in the comment section, and we'll always share with Edwin to give his take on it. Thank you so much. We do this because you're there, and I was in this edition with no other person than 𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐻, and my name is Munja Shell. It's always an honor to be with you. Thank you. Love you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.